thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of today's call. At that time, if you would like to ask a question, you may press star one. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the meeting over to Josh Handel. You may begin.
Thank you, operator, and hi, everyone. My name is Joshua Handel, Public Affairs Officer at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. I'd like to welcome you to today's media teleconference discussing findings and recommendations released today in a report from an agency-commissioned Mars Sample Return Independent Review Board. NASA established the board to evaluate the agency's early concepts for an international partnership with the European Space Agency for one of the most difficult missions humanity has ever undertaken, to return the first samples from another planet. For those watching online at nasa.gov/live, please note there will be a 30-second delay in the streaming to the actual teleconference. Today, we have 5 panelists joining us, 2 of whom will provide brief opening remarks. We will then move to the question and answer session with all 5 panelists, accepting questions from media that dialed into the phone bridge. This media telecon will be limited to 1 hour. Today's panelists are Thomas Verbuchen, Associate Administrator of NASA's Science Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters, Jeff Gramling, Mars Sample Return Program Director at NASA headquarters, Dave Thompson, Mars Sample Return Independent Review Board Chair and retired President of Orbital ATK, Maria Zuber, Mars Sample Return Independent Review Board Member, Standing Review Board Chair, and Vice President for Research at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Peter Teisinger, Mars Sample Return Independent Review Board Member and an employee at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And with that, we'll get started. Thomas, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Josh, and I'm really excited to be releasing this report. First, of course, want to start and thank all members of this independent review board for their hard work and tremendous effort. Between late August and late October, I spent approximately 1,000 person-hours combined to review NASA's plans for this ambitious space mission. And the work they have done is nothing short of what we strive for at NASA. It's with excellence and with the thoroughness that we want at this moment in time. Also, to thank the people on both sides of the Atlantic who have prepared this amazing mission to this state and have been willing and ready with transparency to support the IRB's challenging task. But the reason we have confidence in our undertaking missions such as these is because of our dedicated and passionate workforce, both within NASA, within ESA, and of course the broad community, the commercial community beyond that. Before this review board began its work, this combined NASA-ESA team spent 3 years developing an architecture and maturing the technologies necessary to conduct the flight elements of MSR, Mars Sample Return, that follow Perseverance to return samples to Earth. This team established a feasible baseline concept and a broad set of options of this that this independent review board has now evaluated. I just want to tell you that as an associate administrator and also as a taxpayer, I want us to really challenge ourselves to important missions, but we want to do so every time by keeping our eyes open and learning from every opportunity we have, which is previous missions, other experiences that we have, and the principles of leadership. And so because of the significant and complexity from MSR, NASA has taken unprecedented, purposeful steps to actually get this right. And this includes, first, forming an implementation team early. Second, building this team based on the core competencies and demonstrated experience of the organizations involved. Third, conducting a formal independent review years before such a review is traditionally done. And I just want to tell you, it's a first of that kind. And frankly, we're all learning about how to do that. Again, the only reason we did it is to enhance our opportunities to be successful by opening our eyes wide in that third important step. The fourth is forming a program standing review board prior to the conduct of the mission concept review. That's at least a year before such a board is traditionally formed. It's a board that is led by Dr. Maria Zuber, who, of course, was also part of the independent review board here. And then finally, completing institutional independent cost and schedule estimates and two external independent cost and schedule estimates to inform our decision-making years before such work is traditionally done. Our hope is that those early initiatives and the diligence as we go forward throughout the entire lifetime of this mission will actually give us the best chance of creating, of course, mission success primarily, but also programmatic success, which is to keep us within the bounds of budget and schedule that are there. So today, NASA released a report with its independent review board's recommendation to NASA to successfully achieve the Mars sample return mission. And with NASA's initial responses to those recommendations, I just want to say NASA and I personally am very pleased with the MSR formulation work completed to date. And note that reviewing these activities over the next several months, both the independent review board and the NASA standing review board have recommended that NASA needs to proceed forward with this program based on the work that was done and the promise that is there. NASA will, of course, continue to regularly assess the progress of the team and make updates to the MSR mission concept based on the feedback received from both the independent and standing review board. The formal MSR program baseline will be established at a date consistent with NASA's life cycle review process. We refer to that moment as confirmation or key decision point C, key decision point Charlie, which is, years down the path. So I really look forward to continuing the work in coordination with our partners, the European Space Agency. We have been very transparent with them, and I want to tell you, we established a really firm kind of partnership at many levels. And I just want to thank my counterpart, David Parker, over at ESA for the transparency we've been building this partnership on, and again, at all levels below that. And also all the partners within NASA and beyond that will be important for this. And with this, Dave, Tom, I just want to thank you for the important work. I know this took all your life and the lives of your committee members, which of course are named in the report that is posted right now, but I'm happy to introduce you for your report, Dave. Go ahead.
Thank you, Thomas, and good morning, everyone. I'll begin with the Independent Review Board's fundamental conclusion. We unanimously believe that the Mars Sample Return Program should proceed. We think its scientific value will be extraordinarily high, with the potential for world-changing discoveries about Earth's nearest planetary neighbor, and possibly about an independent origin of life on another world. However, as the first round-trip mission to another planet, Mars Sample Return is also an extremely ambitious, technically but demanding and operationally complex program. Therefore, the IRB strongly recommends that the program should be conducted with rigorous technical and managerial approaches that are fully consistent with those of recent NASA Class A Category 1 missions. That is the highest standard of space robotic programs. On behalf of my fellow IRB members, I want to thank Thomas for entrusting us with this important review. Commissioning this independent assessment at an early point in the MSR program, he asked us to identify any significant planning oversights and to highlight major technical and programmatic risks so that alternatives could be considered and mitigating actions could be taken at the outset. This should help avoid problems that could arise later in the program and that could be more difficult and disruptive to address at that time. I also want to express our appreciation to Jeff Gramling at NASA headquarters, Bobby Braun at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and their MSR team for the excellent support that they provided to our work. And finally, I want to thank my colleagues on the IRB for their strong commitment and contributions to our review. Before summarizing our primary recommendations, I want to briefly cover how our review was chartered, who the members of the board were, and how we went about carrying out the task. As noted in our report on page 9, the IRB's charter was quite comprehensive in scope. We were asked to examine the technical concept the MSR team had developed during its pre-phase A work over the last several years, to assess the robustness of their developmental and operational approaches to the mission, and to evaluate the probable schedule and cost of the upcoming phase A through D efforts between now and launch. We were also charged with identifying important technical trade studies and make-buy decisions yet to be addressed, and to comment on organizational assignments and managerial approaches. The full terms of reference for the IRB are included in the report's appendix, and our responses to specific questions posed to the board are also shown in the report on pages 14 and 15. As Thomas indicated, the IRB consisted of 10 members, as shown in the report on page 8. As you can see from this list, 4 of our members, Michelle, Gentry, Joe, and Pete, came from NASA. One of our colleagues, Anders, represented the European Space Agency. 2 members came from the planetary science community, Minnie and Maria. And 3 people, Antonio, Tom, and I, brought a space industry background to the team. Biographies of all the members are also included in the report's appendix. We also benefited from the great support of Jens, Laura, and Josh, our review manager, deputy review manager, and public affairs officer at NASA headquarters. In total, we spent over 1,000 person hours on the review during a 9-week period from late August through the end of October. The process we used involved 25 plenary meetings of the full IRB, usually at a rate of 3 per week. We received 6 formal presentations by the MSR team at NASA and ESA, and conducted about 30 informal meetings and expert interviews with individuals both inside and outside the program organization. And finally, we reviewed 4 sets of internal and external schedule and cost analyses, 2 of which were done by groups outside of NASA itself. Our final report consists of a total of 88 detailed findings and recommendations spanning 4 categories of effort, including organization and management, scientific priorities and integrated operations, technical approach, and schedule and cost assessments. Our top 6 recommendations are as follows. Number 1, NASA should proceed with the MSR program. In doing so, we strongly encourage the agency and its partner at ESA to maintain mission success as the top priority in all technical, programmatic, and organizational decisions. Number 2, since the current development schedules necessary to achieve 2026 launches were judged by the IRB to not be compatible with recent NASA experience on similar Class A missions, we believe NASA should replan the program for launches in 2027 and 2028. Number 3, partly as a result of a longer development schedule and also to reflect a higher confidence level cost estimate, we recommend NASA increase the Phase A to D budget to the range of $3.8 to $4.4 billion. Number 4, during the upcoming Phase A work, we recommend the MSR team continue to pursue and in some areas to expand mission architectural and vehicle design options with emphasis on the ongoing 1 versus 2 lander trade studies. Number 5, we recommend NASA re-examine and, when possible, simplify the current field center roles and responsibilities whose complexity adds to technical and programmatic risk to MSR's success. And finally, number 6, we suggest the agency integrate scientific priorities and mission operations of Mars 2020, also, of course, called Perseverance, with MSR at all levels, including program management at NASA headquarters, in order to keep everyone focused on the primary goal of both missions, which, as was succinctly stated by one of the planetary scientists that we interviewed, it's all about the samples. Each of these top-level recommendations is supported by and expanded on with additional material in the report, including more detailed findings and recommendations. I'll wrap up my opening remarks by restating the IRB's conclusion that the MSR program should proceed. After a thorough review of the progress to date and the plans for future work, we believe NASA and ESA are now ready to carry out Mars sample return, and that the campaign has extraordinary potential for world-changing scientific discoveries. Thank you, and Josh, back to you.
Thank you so much, Dave. And a quick reminder for those listening that the board's report, along with NASA's responses, may be viewed at nasa.gov/reports. We will now move on to the question and answer session. To ensure we get as many reporters' questions as possible, we will need to limit everyone to 1 question and 1 follow-up. Operator, let's begin.
If you would like to ask a question, please press star 1 and record your name clearly when prompted. To withdraw your question, you may press star 2. One moment, please, for our first question. Our first question comes from Russell Pounds with Pacific Rim Media. Your line is open.
Good morning. I'm calling from Anchorage, Alaska today, and took a quick look at the report. Thank you for that. A few days ago, the OSIRIS-REx team spoke about risk mitigation in their mission, and the example was including hardware and uploading software for natural feature tracking to refine the landing. So for the Mars sample return, what activities are you most concerned about on this mission? For example, the mission flexibility, where you can adapt to things that might surprise the public. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe that's for Jeffrey.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Of course, every mission to Mars has things that we're worried about, and with most Mars missions, entry, descent, and landing is certainly one of those things. But throughout the mission, in pre-phase A that we're moving into phase A, we're going to continue to look for resiliency to make sure that we're building an architecture that is as resilient as we can make it, and gives us the opportunities to maximize mission success. So appreciate your question.
Yeah, and Jeffrey, anything in particular that let's make sure we include this so that we can adapt when we find something that we're not expecting?
So, of course, Perseverance we're getting ready to land Perseverance, and we have built in resiliency as we go and look for the samples into the mission to give us the best opportunity of identifying the scientifically selected samples that we want to return. with this mission to land and then retrieve those samples. There are key mission elements that we're going to be paying attention to, landing on Mars, launching from Mars, and then intercepting the sample and returning it back to Earth are all key things that we're going to be paying attention to and looking to design in resiliency.
Great. Thank you so much.
Let's see, could I just jump in? This is Maria. I also want to add is because of the fact that Perseverance will have been on the surface of Mars collecting samples prior to the landing of the first MSR landing, we will know that area, that part of Jezero Crater, better than anywhere else we have ever collected samples from off of the surface of Earth. And so as a consequence of that, the fact that we will have that early reconnaissance of that area, to say nothing of all of the reconnaissance that has come from orbit, where we have images with resolutions of 37.5 centimeters, that in itself is a form of resiliency.
That's great. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you, Jeff and Maria. Operator, next question, please.
Our next question comes from Jeff Faust with Space News. Your line is open.
Hi, good morning. Question probably for Thomas. At what point do you expect to be able to make a decision on potentially moving what are currently the 2026 lander and orbiter missions to 2028? Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jeff. You know, of course, better than almost anybody listening to this, that kind of a decision like this is one that, of course, is technical in nature and is really important. We want to do that, but also requires bringing with us a community, both in Europe, but also our stakeholders, communities on the Hill, and across the government to really make a decision like that as it affects the profile of expenditures as we're going on. My full expectation is that as we're moving into phase A of this mission, that within, during phase A, kind of with a full and detailed now analysis of the schedule, really looking at all options, including kind of details, frankly, that are far beyond the scope of the IRB, such as the COVID impacts that are still affecting us, that kind of on the timescale of a year or so, that would be, I think we could really kind of narrow down on this. I'm really interested in though, Jeff's opinion on this, and then perhaps Maria at the back end from her point of view of the IRB and SRB. Go ahead, Jeff.
And of course, we're proceeding into formulation here in the beginning of the calendar year, and we're going to continue to study the schedule. Of course, in line with the IRB's recommendations, we're going to continue to hold schedule through PDR and continue to look at all of our launch opportunities, and looking forward to a final launch decision being made at KDP-B or KDP-C, which is confirmation.
Yeah, so I would just add that from the point of view of the IRB and the SRB, the Standing Review Board, actually, full steam ahead. So identifying both heritage and technological developments that have to happen as early as possible, and then really running those challenges to the ground to try to move forward as quickly as possible. So whatever the decision turns out to be, getting the most work done early and understanding the system risks early, and then addressing them is going to serve NASA well, whatever their decision turns out to be.
Thank you, Thomas, Jeff, and Maria. Operator, let's move on to the next question.
Our next question comes from Megan Bartels with Space.com. Your line is open.
Thanks so much for taking my question. I think it's for Jeff, but if anyone else wants to chime in, that would be great too. The report talks about how it becomes significantly more difficult to launch if you missed that 2028 window, could you talk about what changes between 2028 and 2030? And then for any potential launch opportunities before then, sort of what those technical factors are that would make those launches more difficult? Thanks.
Yes, thanks for the question. So there are a few things that become more difficult after 2028. So one is the pressure environment at Mars. The other is the type of orbit it drives us to, larger launch vehicles, and it just makes the mission more complicated, potentially requiring redesign of the elements. So we're really focused on looking at the launch dates between 26 and 28 as our highest priority to make sure we can make those.
Great.
Pete, would you like to chime in with your insights?
The conditions when you arrive at Mars change dramatically over the Martian year. The atmospheric pressure, the dust season, they're all very dramatically variable over the Martian year, and launch opportunities after 2028 don't arrive at a very attractive season in terms of either the entry, descent, landing parameters, or also the dust season parameters, and these are solar-powered missions. And so for those reasons, as Jeff mentioned, a significant redesign for the early 30s would be required, and we want to avoid doing that in the middle of the program. So we want to make sure that we design for the opportunities that we really think we're going to meet.
Great, thank you.
The other big factor goes to resiliency. We're looking to use Mars 2020 to return samples to our sample retrieval lander, in addition to our sample fetch rover. So we'd like to maximize the chances of the Mars 2020 still being operational in that time frame.
Great.
Thank you very much. Operator, next question, please.
Our next question comes from Stephen Clark with Spaceflight Now. Your line is open.
Hi, this is Stephen Clark, Spaceflight Now. I think my questions are for Pete. Interested in what the IRB identified as maybe the most technologically risky part of the entire MSR campaign. Just a couple of technologies that maybe low TRL that need to be matured before the mission can launch. And also, given your experience on the Mars program over the last couple of decades, just wanted to get your thoughts on how far we've come in terms of, since landing Pathfinder on Mars a little over 20 years ago to foreseeing an MSR mission with a MAV and multiple rovers, and the complexity of technology, how much it's advanced since that first rover landed. Thanks.
I'd like to kind of tackle the second one first. The way you presented the question tells you everything you need to know about how far we've come. From Pathfinder, we hadn't landed since Viking, and now we're landing metric ton size vehicles on the planet with tremendous capability, both in perseverance and science capability, and then in this mission in engineering and logistics capability, and able to move the samples around and collect them. I think the two most challenging parts of the mission are the MAV, the launch from Mars, from basically a not a mobile platform, but a not a large platform either, into a Earth orbit, into a Mars orbit, and the rendezvous of that sample by the ERO. And then the second part is the actual collection of the sample container, ingesting it into the return vehicle, the containment and Earth return system, encapsulating it to protect back contamination, and then putting it in the Earth return capsule and then returning it to Earth. I think those are the two really tremendous steps forward. first-time events, never contemplated before, major technological challenge. So I think those are the two areas that the team is rightfully focusing on as major steps forward that need early development and technological readiness.
Yeah, and if I could jump in here, this is a robotic mission, obviously, but a number of the elements that are contained in this mission are actually demonstrating processes, if not technologies, that we're ultimately going to need when we send humans to Mars. So it's going to be the first time we do a round trip to another planet that isn't the moon. Okay, we're going to land a heavier spacecraft than we have landed on the surface of Mars. We're going to be demonstrating a more advanced precision landing technology than we have before. We're going to launch a rocket off the surface of Mars, which is going to be fantastic, and then we're going to have to do in-orbit rendezvous around the surface of Mars, and then return to Earth as well. So, and then while on the surface of Mars, there's going to be the process of assessing the characteristics of the soil, any potential toxicity, chemical toxicity of the soil, because we're going to be bringing these samples back to an Earth laboratory. So there's an awful lot of things that we're going to learn here that are going to be helpful to us in future human exploration of Mars as well.
Thank you, Peter and Maria. Operator, let's move to the next question.
Our next question comes from Mark Carreau with Aviation Week. Your line is open.
Yes, thank you. I recall from previous assessments of Mars missions, there's been concern about having adequate communication between the planet and Earth, and that would be a huge necessity with the intricate activities that might be going on during this period. Was that addressed in the report, or has that sort of planning been addressed already? And if I might just ask, if you launch in 28, when would the samples come back to Earth?
So this is Jeff. In terms of your question about communications, the part of the architecture is the Earth Return Orbiter that's being built by ESA is also going to function as a relay asset while we're performing the surface mission, and that includes support to Mars 2020 while ERO is there. So yes, we're kind of taking along our own comm in a sense. So we're also looking at using the existing assets that are providing relay functions around Mars, and how and when we might want to use those to support this mission. So those things will be studied in Phase A as well.
Do you mind if I just add a comment, Jeff? And that is that communication is an important part of the infrastructure overall, not just for Mars sample return, which is what, of course, is being addressed, but also because of the many other missions that are out there, including a potential future kind of leg of Perseverance beyond this. And I just want to say that as part of our budget that is under consideration, an ICE mapper kind of focus mission, a resource focus mission, was proposed to really look at that communication structure. I also am aware, of course, looking at the industry overall, of interest and abilities to address communication needs, and we want to look at any and all options, kind of to create robustness, especially for a Mars program to come that is out there. So for it's on our radar. It's an important subject still, and we're focusing on it both for MSR and beyond.
Thank you very much, Jeff and Thomas. Operator, let's move to the next question.
Our next question comes from Kenneth Chang with the New York Times. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you very much. I was wondering, so the recommendations of the IRB are that you delayed launches by 1 or 2 years and increase the budget by 30%. Is that because you found NASA's work estimates unrealistic? And is that because that the usual program development delays, or is there specific items that you thought just wouldn't be ready in time? And with 2028, why not keep 2026 and then slip if necessary? Thank you.
That sounds like one I probably ought to field. This is Dave Thompson, Ken. The IRB looked at questions of schedule and cost from several different perspectives. We compared, beginning with schedule, we compared the actual development time that was involved in as comparable a set of programs as we could find to both the lander on Mars sample return and the critical payload that goes with the orbiter, and concluded from that comparison that the schedules required to support launches in 2026 were substantially shorter than actual experience from these recent, somewhat similar programs that included Perseverance, that is Mars 2020, as well as Curiosity or Mars Science Laboratory. We also looked at the content of the technical work planned for both the landers and the orbiter, which we thought was well scoped. But we also concluded that some of the time intervals were probably a bit on the ambitious side. And putting all that together, we concluded that to have a high probability of achieving the launch schedule, that about a 22-month delay in the lander launch from the summer of 2026 to the late spring of 2028 was indicated. And on the orbiter, there were a couple of options that might still be considered. One that involved a delay from the fall of 2026 to the slightly later in the fall of 2027, or to the summer of 2028. Having come to those conclusions, we also looked at the expected development cost to be incurred by NASA between the start of formulation, which NASA calls Phase A, and the launch, which completes Phase D. And in part due to the expected longer development schedules, but also as a reflection of a higher confidence level of cost estimating, we concluded that the total budget to get into the range of 70 to 80% confidence level should be increased, as I indicated earlier, to by about $1 billion over the current planning budgets. There was no significant impact in the cost increase that was associated with adding additional technical scope to the program. We thought NASA had done a pretty good job at that. There were some secondary areas where we recommended NASA include some additional testing, which was already being considered by the agency, and that factored in as well, but that had a relatively minor impact on our cost estimates.
Thank you very much, Dave. Operator, let's move on to the next question.
Our next question comes from Keith Cowens with NASAWatch.com. Your line is open.
Yes, a question which is probably best for Thomas. I'm looking at page 4 on the PDF file, and it refers to a, quote, new ground-based sample facility. Now, I realize you're talking about mission architecture and so forth, but the whole point of this mission is to spit out a sample at the end of the process into a secure facility. I guess this doesn't really get discussed all that much. I realize it's more than a decade away, but these things are never cheap. Are you talking about just building one dedicated facility, de novo, or are you looking to modify one? Is ESA going to have their own? And also, just in terms of the cost factor, as you can probably imagine, there will be some public interest, shall we say, in having Mars samples unearthed, and building a BSL-4 plus facility is not going to be cheap, and the NEPA process will probably take some time. So where do you start this process of saying we would like to put the sampling facility in one location? And have you talked to people such as the nuclear waste disposal people and so forth about how to, walk through this gauntlet that you'll need to go through?
Thanks so much, Keith, and I appreciate the question. It's like you said, it's an important activity, and kind of the details of that activity was actually on the outside of the scope of the IRB. But let me just address it nonetheless, right? Which is there's a few principles that we are putting ahead in our planning, and principles that we've agreed with the Europeans, namely that, of course, we're going to use planetary protection protocols that are consistent with the kind of considerations that you just outlined, and, agencies from which we can learn. Some such discussions have happened already or are happening right now across the U.S. government, as well as our interagency overall discussion, as well as with partners beyond that, loosely associated with COSPAR. Our academies, for example, have set up a standing review board to help us advise on this, as well as other groups. It is also true that at this moment in time, we have charted an initial group to really look at options for that and look through that. The principle we want to use, no matter what is that. Again, we're using these samples just the same way as the Apollo program did. It was really use the sample as a whole, right? So in other words, the last thing we want to do is create the pizza version of the samples. Everybody gets a slice, right? We want to look at the collection as a whole as one of the most valuable collections of samples ever, in the history of this agency, and probably overall. So we want to look at that together, and whether that ends up being a single facility or others. That particular discussion is really going on right now. It seems that depending on where you are in the process of this sample, right? The sample really changes, or the protection mechanisms really change once certain parameters are established. What I'm going to do is stop talking and just see whether Maria wants to add something, because she, of course, is a planetary scientist, has thought about this even more than I have.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that opportunity, Thomas. So I just want to say personally how impressed I am, and as also the IRB, in terms of the engagement of planetary protection at the outset of this mission, in very significant ways to really look at both forward and any issue of potential back contamination. And this is the first time that NASA has gone outside the agency right at the get-go to bring in biological experts from across the government, and then bringing in the national academies, right at the beginning, to look at the planetary protection issues. So I think they are way ahead of where they have been in other missions, and justifiably so. So when these samples come back, the idea is that they will go to this new facility, and they will be examined there, and then assessments will be made how and when they can go to other laboratories outside of the government. And so the details of all of that, again, as Thomas has said, are not within the purview of the independent review board. But there are groups that are being convened to start to look at that, and there is time. But as you noted in your question, it takes a while to do these things. So it's the right time to be asking the question, and the right time to start thinking about this.
Thank you very much, Thomas and Maria. Operator, let's please move on to the next question.
Our next question comes from Irene Klotz. Your line is open.
Thank you. My question's for Dave and maybe also Thomas and Maria. How much does this effort hinge on the commercial space industry to pull off, and what specific areas of the mission do you think will be most suited for the commercial space industry, aside from the initial launch services? Thanks.
Well, let me start on that one, and then Thomas and others can join in. Irene, the major elements that seem ideally suited for commercial space systems would be these. First, on the NASA side, the launch vehicle of the lander from Earth, and on the ESA side, the launch of the Earth Return Orbiter from Earth, and then other systems or subsystems of the lander that would be well suited to industrial outsourcing would be the detailed design, production, and system integration of the Mars Ascent vehicle, the rocket that launches the payload from the surface of Mars, and then part of the capture, containment, and return system, the Earth Return vehicle, would also be a good candidate for industrial outsourcing, since most of our recent experience with similar Earth Return vehicles for scientific missions has featured industry development, production, and delivery of those return systems, such as the one that will be employed on OSIRIS-REx in a couple of years.
Do you mind if I just add one small element, and Dave, and that was kind of what was already referred to earlier, which is the comm side of it, right? Kind of, as we go forward and certainly look at the Mars program as a whole, we continue to be excited about potential ways of including commercial ability, and then technical skills, especially as it aligns with their own interests for communications beyond where we are.
Thanks. How about the launch service off the surface of Mars?
I think they've already mentioned that as one of the core elements that they've called.
Okay. Thanks.
Go ahead. MAV. He referred to it as MAV, which is the Mars Ascent vehicle. Okay, so I think that's what he said as a key element. Actually, it's covered in a recommendation. I forgot the exact number. Dave or Maria, perhaps you do.
Yes, that's right. That's in the technical section of the report. Let's see if I can direct you to the page. It take me a minute to find it.
Is there a ballpark of how many companies you think might be able to provide that service?
Yeah, I don't see that as being done on a service contract basis at this point, but I do think with NASA's overall design being converted into details and with the production and so on being carried out by industry, that would be a good opportunity. And I can't.
It's on page 39 of the report.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maria.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Operator, let's move on to the next question.
Our next question comes from Ken Kramer with Space Up Close. Your line is open.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this briefing. I'm wondering, moving from 2026 to 2028, are you not at all concerned that you're introducing a lot of risk if you delay that and you don't make that window?
I'm just thinking maybe you should push a little harder for 2026, because if you're talking about having to replan the whole program if you miss the 2028 launch windows, that introduces a lot of risk too.
Do you mind if I just start with this? I think Maria said it earlier better than I'm going to do it, which is basically the way we're interpreting the collective kind of recommendations is full steam ahead. And we have in this independent review board, of course, a recommendation and an assessment that is there. We're going to put that, as we've said in our letter, we, of course, will look at that, and really investigate all of the launch options that are there. And frankly, try to figure out with all the constraints we have, both schedule and financial and otherwise, when everything is there, to kind of figure out within these constraints what the earliest reasonable way is of doing that, for the same reason that you just said, Ken, which is what we thought the last thing we want to do, right? And we're not interpreting the IRB's recommendation that way. The last thing we want to do is kind of turn a switch right now without really investigating this and looking at all options and kind of taking this as a key ingredient to our decision process as we go forward. So yes, it's full steam ahead. Just the way you said, we're not taking a break in any fashion.
Yeah, and I don't think it shouldn't be interpreted that the IRB is insinuating that the program ought to slow down whatsoever. In fact, it's an absolute necessity to keep pushing forward as fast and safely as possible, because we all understand what a launch slip could do. But it's also necessary to understand, realistically, that there would be impacts, the cost and schedule impacts on the possibility that a later launch may be necessary.
Thank you, Maria.
I'd like to chime in here. This is Pete. We mentioned explicitly a couple of times in the report the desire of the IRB to maintain the PDR schedule at its present date and to augment funding if necessary, actually to augment funding period in the Phase A pre-PDR period in order to maintain that pace. The IRB schedule conclusion recognize the need to do the work at the front end, recognize the need to do the appropriate V&V at the back end, and felt that the middle of the implementation between PDR and the beginning of integration and test was the place where there was risk.
Okay. One other thing I wanted to ask about was the speed of the Fetch rover. It came up, I think, at the Mars rover Perseverance mission that this Fetch rover is going to have to move a lot quicker to get these samples. What do you say about that? Is that technically feasible? How difficult is it to collect those samples in time?
I think that the desire is to place the Fetch rover relatively close to the cache left by Perseverance. And the team was presented with an operational scenario on the surface between the time of landing and the need to launch the MAB that had significant margin in it, and the Fetch rover met those speed requirements. So I don't think that's an issue. Now, the whole depoting strategy for Perseverance and where the samples are, that will require constant refinement as the Perseverance mission goes forward and the MSR planning continues. But right now, we don't see an issue there.
Yeah, and I'll just add, this was part of the motivation for the IRB recommendation about the necessity for the close coupling between Mars 2020 and MSR.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Operator, let's move on to the next question.
Our next question comes from Christina Anderson. Your line is open.
Thank you for taking my question. Could someone talk a little bit more about the science that you hope to get coming back when the sample is returned to Earth? I think that could be very exciting. Thank you.
Well, this is Maria. I'll just jump in and say I absolutely agree with you that the science would be very exciting. so we've done a lot of analyses in situ with Mars rocks on the surface of Mars, and clearly those have been very valuable in improving our understanding of the early history of the red planet. But what you can do with a rock, bringing it back and working in a terrestrial lab, just by analogy, the moon rocks that we brought back more than 50 years ago, we are still making state-of-the-art discoveries with those rocks because of the fact that instrumentation in terrestrial labs has continued to improve. Okay, so for example, one thing that you can do on the surface of Earth now is get the absolute age of a sample, okay, as opposed to the relative age being this is old, this is younger or older than that. So establishing an absolute chronology of samples on the surface of Mars is crucial. Now, the fact that you can wander around and understand, look at the rocks and understand their geologic context, you combine that with the chemical information in the rocks, with the physical properties of the rocks, and with the age of the rocks, is what allows you to reconstruct essentially the history of that area. Now, the Jezero crater is a crater. It has a delta in it. It was filled with water early in its history, and it was filled at the time when there was a lot of surface runoff on Mars, where the valley networks were. So it was the point of view the point of time where liquid water was stable on the Martian surface, and so the rocks will essentially provide. It's a little bit like a detective story, and they will produce a timeline, essentially, of the history of what was going on in this crater, and it'll be indicative of what Mars was like in that very early period when water was stable on the surface. As you could tell, I'm excited about this.
Thank you, Maria. Operator, let's please move on to the next question.
Our next question comes from Thomas Schumann with Radio 4 in Denmark. Your line is open.
Yes, hello, good morning. I guess this question is for David. I noticed among the 6 recommendations, one is to simplify current center organizational roles and responsibilities, which are unduly complex, it says. What is it about it that is unduly complex?
That recommendation really focuses on NASA's internal division of labor. NASA is organized into centers around the U.S., number 10, and 6 of those centers are currently planned to have substantial contributions to the Mars Sample Return Program. It's clearly a complex enough program that no single center could fully implement it on its own. However, as the number of centers increase, so do the number of interfaces, and we suggest that NASA, having studied this in the past, take one more look at whether the technical capabilities and the available capacity of its different centers are best aligned with the task ahead. So the recommendation really focuses on NASA internal allocation of responsibilities, not the division of responsibilities between NASA and ESA, which seems reasonable to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Operator, let's go to the next question.
Our next question comes from Leo Enright with Irish Television. Your line is open.
Thanks very much. Back to the Fetch rover. Pete told Ken Kramer there just a few minutes ago that there wasn't any real concern about the speed of the Fetch rover, but there are several references in the report. I mean, B5, C4, to issue. There's a repeated reference to mobility, surface lifetime requirements. I mean, are there some concerns about the current capabilities of the Fetch rover? And I'm looking also particularly at C4. There's a reference to RHUs. Are there no RHUs currently in the plan for the Fetch rover? But they're obviously not controversial, so it seems a bit surprising if they haven't been included in the design.
If I can jump in, I wouldn't call the concerns that you are seeing in the report have to do fundamentally with the inheritance of the Fetch rover from its ExoMars rover pedigree. Okay, and the desire of the IRB to look throughout the campaign for places to maximize inheritance in order to reduce the technical risks of new developments or technology. And so we're encouraging the studies going on in the pre-phase A, phase A period to re-examine places where changes could be made, modest changes could be made that would enhance the ability of the Fetch rover to borrow from the ExoMars inheritance. The Fetch rover, as it's currently designed and spec'd by ESA, meets all the mission requirements with margin. Okay, it's simply our desire to find areas to reduce the technical risk that led to those recommendations to perhaps relook at those issues during the study period.
And the RHUs?
There are no RHUs currently on the Fetch rover. And we have asked, and I think that the team will study whether or not they could be included in the ultimate design. But that's ongoing work.
Thank you very much, Peter. We are at the top of the hour, so operator, we have time for one last question before we need to wrap up.
Our next question comes from Kenneth Chang of the New York Times. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking my second question. I just was wondering about the disconnect with the notion idea that astronauts will be going to Mars in the 2030s, and if you believe Elon Musk's schedule, he would have colonists there a decade earlier. I was wondering, is that if those were realistic, it seems like you might as well just wait for the astronauts to pick up things, or is it that the current ideas of when people get to Mars are too far ahead? Thank you.
Ken, I'm going to go with that. So first of all, I know I speak for many others, are extremely enthusiastic about organizations such as the one led by Elon Musk going to Mars and being excited about this and bringing people there. We want to do the same at NASA. I know other agencies are thinking about the same thing. I want to be sure that as we talk about sample return, we recognize that there's an important element that Perseverance is doing right now that is absolutely critical for the value of the samples. And I'm going to invite Maria perhaps to add comments at the back end of this. And that is that the samples come out of an analysis context and a geologic context that basically puts them makes them much more valuable in their interpretation than any old rock you would pick up at any old location, right? I'm not saying that anybody else would do precisely that. I'm just saying that the Perseverance investigation is a critical element, together with all its sensing instruments, a critical element for making these samples absolutely important. Now, needless to say, with that, I just want to say we could not be more excited if others go there faster. And of course, as we have in so many other places, we have worked with other companies to kind of make sure that we can benefit from the science perspective of their aspirations. We will continue to do that here also. Maria, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. So let me just amplify what you said there, Thomas. Ken, when Perseverance is, on its traverses, it will be analyzing, with its payload, many aspects of the sites around which the samples are collected. If it turns out that humans go to Mars in a similar time frame, well, great. They can collect samples. I hope they're trained geologists, and whether or not they'll be spending the time doing the reconnaissance and the analyses, at the level of the robotic partners are, that I think is a matter of question. But in any case, the optimal way to explore, and many studies have shown, is humans and robots working together. But we don't know. We hope, but we don't know the time frame that humans are going to be on the surface of Mars. We hope it's as soon as possible. I have no doubt that the technologies that are being matured as part of the Mars Sample Return mission are going to be valuable for part of the human exploration program, as I noted previously.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thomas, I'll turn it over to you for closing remarks before we conclude today's teleconference.
Yeah, really, we appreciate getting the opportunity to just quickly speak one more time. And what I want to do is thank again the Independent Review Board under the leadership of Dave Thompson and Maria and Pete, who are here online, as well as all the others who are part of that, both as members but also support staff who have really provided this input, which we really value. I also want to thank the MSR team, the international MSR team, for the work performed to date, and frankly, the continued focus on getting this right, doing the right. I want to remind everybody, if you look at that from afar and look just at the U.S. cost, which is there, this is a mission of the scale of Mars 2020 and Clipper, pretty much in that range exactly. And so I believe that with the right really taking this seriously as well as the future diligence on really solving problems early and integrating, keeping an honest communication between all partners, I really do believe this IRB report will be critical in the story, if you want, of this critical mission to really do this historic achievement that we're trying to do, which is really the first round trip to this other planet, and enabling science of the type that we've talked about here, that I believe is in every way of the most exciting and most important science we could be doing right now. And of course, it's not because I said so, it's because the Academy said so. So I want to thank everybody and turn it back over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Thomas. And that concludes today's teleconference. Thank you to all of the journalists who dialed in today, and thank you to all of the panelists for their time. And operator, thank you very much for your support. If you joined this teleconference late, or if you'd like to listen to the entire recording again, you may do so by dialing 1-800-677-1310. Again, that number is 1-800-677-1310. The recording will be available 1 hour after this call is completed and will be accessible for 30 days. Thank you again for joining us today to hear more about this truly incredible mission.
This now concludes today's call. All participants may disconnect at this time.